Being a ranger isn't always easy. Sure, I get to see some of the most beautiful scenery in the country and talk to people from all walks of life. In addition, it is a great career for someone like me who just loves being outdoors. However, dealing with those who are uninformed and do not understand the park rules or how our park society actually works can be difficult at times. And a lot of them don't even realize that the rules are there to protect them from things they couldn't even imagine. I once read something on a Reddit thread about how Stephen King must have had a park ranger on retainer to get story ideas. While I highly doubt that it is true, we do see stuff that I bet most horror writers couldn't even dream of. One thing that never fails to freak me out, no matter how many times it happens, and it is way more often than you would think, is when you come across something that has absolutely no right to be there, and you have no clue how it could have possibly gotten there. Staircases being discovered, okay, you might think at some point there must have been a building many years ago, and all that's left is the stairs. The only issue being that the trees surrounding the structure are hundreds of years old, and the stairs are not. So there couldn't possibly have been any building there, and none of the trees are damaged, and there is no route or trail leading up to the area for some big-time practical joker to plant it there for some YouTube show. They're just there, the same with abandoned cars. They appear in areas that have been looked at many times before, maybe on foot or with an ARV, but again, there is no way a truck, camper van, etc. could have gotten there. Yet we find them sometimes in a state of decay, showing the vehicle had been there for years, when in reality, that area had been checked and reported back on only a few days ago. Sometimes when we check, the vehicles are registered to people who have been missing for years. Other times, they just don't seem to exist in the system. And once in a while, we find a person, sometimes alive, other times just a body. Sometimes they actually are hikers or hunters who've lost their way, and other times, they are not. We have found people wandering around in places that had been checked only a few hours before, looking like they've been lost for days. When we finally manage to convince them that we are the good guys and want to help, we find that they've been missing for days and weeks and are not even from the US, let alone this area. The scariest part is that they have no idea how they got there. These are ordinary people who at one moment are sitting at a desk in Germany. The next thing you know, it's 3 weeks later, and they're here in America, having no idea how they ended up here. You won't find these sorts of reports on your local news, so don't bother looking. We take them straight to a government building and, well, they deal with it. So next time you are hiking, and you've been doing it for years, and a ranger tells you not to go somewhere, or you're hunting and they tell you to avoid a certain area, do what they say. We are not being a pain and trying to ruin your day. We are looking after you because something is out there, dumping bodies, cars, even people into our forests and parks. If something or someone is doing that, then maybe, just maybe, they're also taking things. And the hikers that go missing, just maybe, they were not dragged off by a bear or fell down a ravine and were eaten. Maybe they'll turn up somewhere in the middle of the desert, in another country, and that country's government will come along and deal with them. And from what I've seen from the few moments I've spent in the company of one of those people, you do not want that to be you. I am writing to you from Kutztown, Pennsylvania. I am an avid rock climber and often take my skills out of the climbing gym and into the real world. This type of climbing is considered bouldering, and me and my friends try to get out just about every weekend. Well, this time that we tried to go climbing, all of my friends ended up bailing on me. They all had something to do or somewhere to be, so I had to go solo. This was my first mistake. In general, it is a terrible idea to go climbing alone because of the risk of injury and all, but I told myself I'd take it easy and only go on the easiest routes possible. There are several spots in my area with good conditions for climbing, and I have been to nearly all of them. I decided to head out to one of my favorite boulders and start to test out some problems. Entering the parking lot for the campground, I only saw 1 or 2 cars, but that wasn't odd for a midday climb. You need to hike about 15 minutes into the forest in order to get to these rocks. It's a heavily wooded area with a canopy of deciduous trees and tall pines all over. You can see a ton of wildlife like squirrels and deer and songbirds all bustling about. It was midday when I went over there and the sun was out, so it was really a nice and peaceful mood. Walking into the forest, I didn't notice anything weird, but I did have an odd feeling in my gut. I felt like maybe I was being watched or something. I thought I was nervous to be climbing alone, and that's how I explained away the fact that I kept hearing footsteps behind me. Each time when I turned around, there was nothing there. My gut started to twist a bit, but I'd already driven all the way out there and hiked all the way over. Once I reached the rocks, I set up my equipment and dusted my hands with some chalk. I took a long look at the boulder that I wanted to scale and decided what I presumed the easiest path would be. The boulders in this area were steep and made of a crumbling granite with small holds. As I got going, I felt more and more confident. I was doing fine and getting some great climbs in. Truly, I didn't want to push my luck and try out anything too tough. I stuck to the lower levels of the rocks and mostly tried problems that I'd already done before. Oh, that's what the paths are called in bouldering and rock climbing, problems. But the biggest problem I was facing was the fact that I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. No one else was in the area, and I'd only seen 2 hikers as I was walking in. I didn't know if it was just my nerves or something else. Every time I'd turn to begin my climb, I'd hear a rustling in the trees. It almost sounded like someone or something was running in circles around me. Each time I'd flip my head around to look, but in that instant it'd be gone. I just kept climbing though, and eventually my hands felt super sore, and my legs were about to give out. It's hard work hurling yourself up a wall, and I'd been out there for more than 2 hours. So I packed up my stuff and started to make my way back to my car. This is where my story starts to get really strange. I just couldn't find my way back. The trail that I took into the park seemed to have vanished. I began to panic. I'd only hiked in about half a mile, but I didn't know which way I'd come from. I couldn't find the dirt path that had led me there. I walked in circles around the perimeter of the boulder. I decided I needed to get a better vantage point. Not worrying about my previous fears of being alone, I chalked up my hands and started climbing up the tallest boulder so I could see above the trees. In all honesty, the problem was not too difficult, but I was increasingly nervous now that I was lost in addition to being alone. Once I reached the top, I wished I was alone. Standing at the bottom of the cliff was a hideous creature. It had antlers and a body like a deer, but its skeleton was exposed and showed through peeling flesh. It had glowing eyes that flashed red as it stared up at me. I think it had been watching me that whole time. As we made eye contact, it stood up on its hind legs and shot its bare head into the sky to produce a terrible noise. The sound was a cross between a horse's neigh and a scream from a terrified child. I ducked down on the boulder and tried to hide. When I peeked down back over the rock, it was gone, and I spotted the path that would get me out of there. I tried to maneuver myself down the boulder as quickly as I could. Once I reached the ground, I needed to cover my nose. There was a stomach-churning smell of rotting meat and garbage at the base of the rocks. I held my breath and skittishly ran to my car. It felt like a much longer hike on the way out, and I was completely out of breath by the time I opened my car door. After that day, I never saw that thing again. I also will never go climbing alone. I wonder if the creature I saw could have been a Wendigo. I haven't heard of them being so far east, but maybe there is something to it. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments. Some of the things people experience blow my mind. I've been a police officer for about 3 years, and already I could write a book on some of the experiences I've had. I have to tell you about this crazy call I responded to that I could only describe as paranormal. I got a call in about a man who claimed that someone was breaking into his house, so I turned around and headed to his address. He lived in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by woods for miles. If someone was breaking into this guy's house, it was someone who knew him well. I got out of the car and started looking around. The windows of the house were broken, and the door was busted in. I pulled out my gun and yelled, "Police, come out with your hands up." "Thank God," a man screamed, and it almost got me. This was clearly the owner of the house, an elderly gentleman who was shaking in fear. I asked him if there was anyone else in the house, and he told me he was alone. I asked if the burglars were still around, and he said it was no burglar. The demon, it almost got me. I told him to wait in the patrol car where it was safe, and I started looking around the house. I checked every room in the house and didn't see any signs of anyone still there. I circled the outside of the house and looked around. All of the doors and windows were bashed in, but I didn't see any evidence of the criminal still being around. I asked the old man to get out of the patrol car, and we sat down outside. I told him to take deep breaths and calm himself down. I told him the calmer and clearer he was, the better I could help him find the criminal responsible. The man laughed at me and said it was no criminal. The demon will keep trying, but he'll never take me alive. I asked him what he meant, and he said that a demon lived in the woods behind his house. He would see him poke his head out from the trees from time to time and disappear back into the woods. Then the demon got braver and would look through the windows until the old man saw him, and he'd run back off into the woods. He only recently started trying to attack the old man, and this time was the closest he got. The old man described the demon as having pale white skin with large black eyes and a huge mouth. He said it was skinny and tall, and it ran on all fours like a dog. I didn't know how to take this. The man was pretty old, and I doubted he had the capability to bash the windows and doors in himself. He didn't seem crazy, but the demon he was describing couldn't possibly be true, could it? The way I saw it, someone tried to hurt the old man, and maybe it was dark, so he thought he saw a demon. When someone is under that kind of stress, they often recall details inaccurately, and that could be the case here. It could also be somebody wearing some sort of mask to disguise their identity. Either way, I didn't feel good about leaving the old man alone to be attacked again. I asked the man if there was someplace else he could stay, and he refused to leave. "I'm going to be the one to shoot this demon," the man said. "I want to be there when the life leaves his eyes. My face will be the last thing he'll ever see." I didn't want to leave the man, but I got another call that I had to respond to. I checked up on the man about a week later, and he had his windows and doors replaced and seemed to be in a pretty good headspace. One night I responded to a call about someone trying to break into a house. When I looked at the address, it was the same as the old man's. I turned on my lights and siren and sped there as quickly as I could. When I arrived on the scene, the windows were bashed in again and the door was kicked in. I pulled out my gun and shouted, "Police, come out with your hands up." There was no response. I called for the old man several times and got no response. I walked into the house and started looking around. The door to the bedroom was kicked in and a trail of blood went from the bedroom out the back door. I followed the trail, and it was clear a body was dragged out into the woods. I called for backup. I was not about to head into the woods with a murderer by myself. The backup arrived, and we searched all night but couldn't find the old man anywhere. That morning, we found him several miles into the woods with huge bite marks all over his body. Someone or something feasted on the old man. The officers talked about the cannibal in the woods, but I was starting to believe the old man's story. This thing attacked the poor man several times and ate him. I'm not saying that humans aren't capable of cannibalism. After everything I've seen, I can tell you that humans are capable of unspeakable things. But the old man described this creature vividly and saw him on multiple occasions. I feel responsible for his death, and I can't let it go. I can't imagine going out that way, being eaten to death. Nobody deserves that, especially not that old man. Here in the remotest parts of this land, we don't see much at night. However, I feel compelled to write about an incident that happened back in autumn of 2002. Something that has disturbed me ever since and made me feel afraid to sleep or even leave my house for a long time. I was living in a farmhouse with my new husband and daughter. My daughter at the time was only around 6 months old, and she kept waking during the night. I would have to get up with her at least once every night to settle her, feed her, and pacify her. At times I would sing a lullaby in the kitchen as I cradled her, and I would look out at the empty apartment blocks. Mostly I liked looking at the small communal garden we were given as a grant from the government. On one occasion, my husband made a joke that my lullaby would attract criminals to the apartment complex. It was quite a haunting tune, he said. It was a tune that my own grandmother had sung to me, and she left me the words on a little sheet of paper. She always told me that it kept evil spirits away and would protect the crops from any scourges. I was not aware that it sounded haunting because I was so used to it and honestly soothed by it. But occasionally, as I sang it to my daughter, I would see little flickers of light out in the other windows of the apartment complex, as if people had awoken to my singing. On this particular night, I was singing the lullaby and then heard a screeching sound from the small garden outside. Walking over to my window, still singing the lullaby, I saw something that nearly made me drop my daughter. This creature, something that was not human, was something I'd never seen, and it was like it was staring at me. Red eyes, but slits almost. It appeared to be the size and shape of a hyena, and that was really the only creature it reminded me of. It was brown and had kind of a long tail, but what was most peculiar was that the creature had large wings. They kind of extended outwards like a huge web, and it was really pale on the inside. It was bizarre and frighteningly ugly. I covered my daughter's eyes, but I had a feeling that she had glimpsed it. Its face was weird, too. It was kind of goblin fox-like, and it had strange features and was terrifying and demonic. I tried to call for my husband, but words would not leave my mouth. I was totally perplexed by this creature that was sitting in the garden just yards away. I felt sick and troubled. Where had this creature come from? What did it want from me? These were all questions that stirred in my mind, and eventually I managed to back away from the window and walk up the stairs. I awoke my husband, who totally believed me, and came down with a raised baseball bat. When we got down to the window, the creature had gone. We debated calling the police, but we decided not to. We didn't want to make the police think that I was off my rocker and a threat or danger to my child. All I know is there are wild and not so wonderful creatures in the animal kingdom, things that even the most explorative environmentalists can't comprehend. Whatever it was, I saw it with my own 2 eyes. And because it was so disturbing, I have lived a life fraught with tensions and anxiety ever since. My daughter, too, has now encountered problems of her own. Now 20, she still experiences night terrors and calls me in panic if she is home alone. It's as if that memory has been etched into her brain. But I have never brought it to fruition. I have never discussed it with her, but it's definitely affecting her. Now, we stayed at that apartment for 2 years after the incident, and any time I had to wake during the night to go to the kitchen, I would feel dread, expecting to see this thing out there again. I feared it was waiting to reappear and resurface those horrible memories. Thank goodness my husband came down with me every time after that. And luckily, as my daughter got older, I had to do it less and less. It never did surface again. That was the only time I would ever see it. I've always loved horseback riding. It's a mutual agreement of respect and trust. Every chance I got, I would saddle up and ride the trails around Bangor, Maine, my home for the past few years. One evening, I decided to take a leisurely ride around my favorite trail. It was probably late November. We'd been riding for about an hour when my horse, Bella, started acting twitchy. Now Bella was as steady as they come. I'd ridden her in thunderstorms without so much as a flinch, so to see her this nervous was cause for concern. I tried to soothe her, running my hand down her neck and whispering reassurances, but she wouldn't calm down. Despite my initial instinct to turn back, an unexplainable drive prompted me to push forward. The path ahead was shadowed, the setting sun making the once familiar trail seem alien. I dismissed Bella's nervous whinnying to a distant coyote's howl or some unseen deer merely startled by our presence. As we continued deeper into the woods, a musty, damp smell filled my nostrils. It was heavy in the air. The surrounding area was eerily silent now. Suddenly, I heard a loud noise that made me nearly fall off Belle when she spooked. It was a strange sound, something between a yelp and a growl. It was a sound I had never heard in these woods before, not in all my years of riding. The echo reverberated through the woods, bouncing off the trees. The effect was immediate. A primal fear began to stir deep within me, and I felt all the small hairs on the back of my neck stand up straight. Something was wrong. I began to notice odd things along the trail. There were footprints that were way too large to belong to any animal I knew, and besides that, they looked human. Only there was one problem. The person who made them wasn't wearing shoes. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to Maine before, but it gets pretty cold around November, and it wasn't exactly the time of year you could be walking around barefoot. Tree branches started snapping around us. There was something out there. Cautiously, I urged Bella onward, my senses now fully alerted. I was expecting to breathe a sigh of relief in a moment, when it would inevitably turn out to be a raccoon or a deer close by. But that's not what happened. Not at all. Just as we were about to turn a bend, a hulking figure stepped into the middle of the path. A look of disbelief filled my face as I tried to comprehend what my eyes were seeing. This was no ordinary animal. Its dark, coarse hair was somewhat like a bear's. It must have been 6, maybe 7 feet tall, and stood upright just like a man. The creature had a strange conical shape to its head, but it was distinctly ape-like. I swallowed my fear, attempting to make sense of the moment, but the creature changed its stance, revealing piercing, beady eyes, an intense shade of black from what I could make out at this distance. Our eyes locked, and a jolt of adrenaline hit me. Belle stomped her hooves nervously on the ground, and I could tell she wanted to run. Before I could even think to retreat, a low growl rumbled from the creature. I dug my heels into Bella's side, spinning her around, desperately urging her to gallop back the way we'd come, in a frantic bid to escape. As I rode away, I heard the crunching of leaves and breaking branches behind me. A strange, loud whooping sound echoed in the silent forest, following us long after the sight of it was lost. We burst out of the woods and made it back to the barn. After stabling Bella, I numbly stammered through my encounter with the creature to a few bewildered friends, their eyes wide with disbelief. My mind raced, the echo of the Sasquatch's growl resonating in my thoughts. I was sure that's what it was. Nothing else made sense. The sight of its colossal form and that eerie whooping noise painted a chilling specter that refused to fade away. The days that followed were spent in anxiety, filled with intrusive thoughts about the encounter. I couldn't get myself to venture back to those trails. The figure haunted my dreams, those beady eyes seared into my nightmares. Reportedly, other locals and visitors around Bangor had begun to experience similar instances. Stories of brief sightings, inconceivable sounds, and rumors that our peaceful city was home to a Sasquatch spread far and wide. I was one of the few who had seen it, whether you believe me or not. When I was a student, I volunteered in my local library on Saturdays to try and get some work experience. This was an enjoyable job, and one that I truly did enjoy. It was an old library that had been built in the 16th century, so all the architecture was old and Gothic. Apparently, during the 16th century, it was actually used as a prison for suspected witches and black magic practitioners. There was an ancient and spooky feeling in the library, but for me it was a fascinating place to work. On one occasion, however, my last shift to be exact, I encountered something terrifying. After our building supervisors had left the building, it was up to myself and a colleague to ensure that all users had left the premises. When I was doing my end-of-day checks, I went to check on the bathrooms. We had a recurring problem in which local drug addicts were using the toilets as a place to shoot up, so I was slightly anxious about doing this. As I walked over to check, I heard a growling or a grunting noise. It was unusual, and I assumed that somebody had passed out in the bathroom stall. When I opened the door, I saw this strange being. It appeared to be like a short person, but kind of like this disgusting ogre. But imagine it being more like an imp, I guess is what you'd call them. About a foot or two high, strange skin, pointed ears. It literally looked like a little demon. I, in that moment, was petrified and terrified at what I was looking at. This thing was staring right at me, and I wondered if it would strike and assume I was a threat. But it remained passive and stared at me with these small, beady black eyes. I attempted to call for my colleague, but my voice was so faint. Nothing happened. Within seconds, this creature or being just evaporated. Like that. Just gone, dematerialized in the air. My colleague came in wondering what I wanted. She saw that I was completely terrified and confused. That's when she began to doubt my own sanity. Had I simply imagined the whole experience? I feel that whatever I saw got scared, and maybe it's some sort of demon or a shapeshifter. I don't know. Anything. Earlier that day, a customer had actually reported seeing this unusual bird that flew into the library and sat outside. I mean, if that's what it is fascinating that such things of the paranormal still exist here. Due to all the witch and black magic practitioners that existed here at one point, I wonder if there's any connection between the two. I'm writing this to make an inquiry about the disappearance of a French student known as Michelle. I know this sounds odd, but Michelle was last seen hiking in the Six Rivers Forest here in California back in 1996. I think I have a lead. So I was hiking in the Six Rivers Forest a few weeks back with a friend. We are both seasoned hikers, and we're so used to seeing strange creatures, strange flowers, and growths. But we encountered something that, to us, looked dangerous. Something dreadful and unusual that had the potential to kill. There was an open grassland area in which we were both walking. The path was steep and mucky, so it was becoming quite strenuous for us both. What was odd was that it was early, around 11 a.m., but the sky was becoming sort of a dark orange hue, as if it were early evening. When we looked around, there were no other hikers, which was also odd, but we shrugged our concerns, continuing on our path. As we got deeper into the path, we came to the peak of the mountain where we overlooked a sort of valley with overgrown foliage and densely packed wooded areas. My friend shouted, "Look!" and my eyes swept down to see something in the valley, something that I initially thought it was just a hallucination. It was a creature such as I'd never seen before. It was made up out of trees and branches and foliage, but it was in the shape of a large deer. It was green and appeared to be decorated. The branches throughout its body, too, were decorated in various patterns, kind of giving it a sense of structure, and that it did. As I had good eyesight, I could make it all out clearly, and could see even its face had tiny eyes. Its antlers, too, were made up of branches and wood. I would have thought it was a design of some sort or some mural, but it was moving and walking around. It lowered its face to the ground, seemingly for food, and every so often, little sparkles of gold dust flew out of its antlers, dancing into the morning sky. When we took out our cameras, our phones wouldn't work. It was so frustrating because we had never seen such a thing before. It was walking around a small open area surrounded by woodland and a small pond. When I focused further and got a little closer, I could see that around the area were several skeletons, fully formed and lying as if to mark a territory around this thing. At that moment, my blood got cold and I got scared. I grabbed my friend and he pulled me back. After that, we walked carefully back up the path to the north and back to the peak where we originally descended and made our way back to the car. The whole time I was walking back, I felt like I had crossed some boundary, some marking the land that was designed to keep people out. I was also thinking of Michelle a lot and couldn't help but feel that people had gone missing in the forest. They couldn't have possibly been harmed by this strange creature. I figured that even as a park ranger, in their infinite wisdom of nature, they know that this is not beyond the realm of possibility, and that things exist within the universe that we have not quite grasped. Therefore, I'm contacting them in hopes they can help me search the area, preferably with a team and a chopper. I can give them exact coordinates on the map where we encountered this thing. We owe it to the people who enjoy the forest, for our children and their children, for Michelle and her family.